Good afternoon, and welcome to BoardProspects.com's webinar, The Board Member's Perspective on Board Diversity. My name is Mark Rogers, and I am the founder and CEO of BoardProspects.com, and I'm thrilled to have each of you here with us today for this important webinar. Board diversification is a critical step in improving both corporate governance and performance, and Board Prospects is playing an important role in this process. Quite simply, we have revolutionized the board recruitment industry by providing corporations with an innovative and cost-effective platform to identify, assess, and recruit world-class board members from our credentialed community of thousands of board candidates. I am pleased to say that more than 60% of our board candidates at Board Prospects are women or racial or ethnic minorities and represent various industries, skill sets, and age groups. We have heard from so many different groups and stakeholders this past year on the topic of board diversity. In today's webinar, we will finally get to hear from board members from some of the world's most well-known corporations. I am proud to say that today's moderator and all the panelists are members of the prestigious Board Prospects community, and it's truly an honor to have them with us today. I would like to thank Aon, KPMG, Costco, and Bright House Financial for supporting today's webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will conclude promptly at 2 p.m. And with that, I will turn today's webinar over to our moderator, Dr. DeForest Soares. Dr. Soares.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to Board Prospects, your entire team, for assembling this auspicious panel. Thank you for this historic moment. I've been a director in corporate America for 25 years. And for all of those 25 years, diversity has been a conversation, but never has it been elevated to this level of visibility, to this level of expertise, and to a platform that has this reach into not only corporate America, but throughout the country. So thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be the host. In light of the qualifications and credentials of this significant panel, I'm humbled to be serving in this capacity. When we talk about diversity and we go beyond the political and the media images of diversity, I think it's important to really understand the value of not only the conversation, but the importance of the principle of diversity in corporate America as we build, expand, and support the free enterprise system. And so today we're going to start with General Spencer. You can read his bio. He has significant experience and background. In general, I thought we would ask you to open the conversation by reinforcing for some and explaining to others why the topic and the focus on diversity is so important.
Well, thank you so much for the question. And I think it's really important to baseline this discussion up front with why are we talking about diversity and why is it important? First of all, it is the right thing to do. And it's the right thing to do because study after study has reinforced that diverse decision-making, diverse approaches to problems bring about a stronger result than homogeneous discussions. So diversity makes your board stronger, more effective. It makes companies stronger and more effective. The second part of that diversity is inclusion, because the objective here is not to build a Noah's Ark. The objective here is to have a diverse population within a board and then to include them in the discussion. Just a quick anecdote. When I was a brand new second lieutenant, I attended my first staff meeting. I was in a base down at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. And as a second lieutenant, I was buried in the back of the room. I was the only African-American in the room. And the folks around the table, the two-star general was the commander. He had all of his senior folks around the table. I'm in the back of the room. They were discussing a really complex problem, and they couldn't figure it out. So to make a long story short, the commander wheeled around at the end of the meeting because they didn't have a solution and started going person by person just to see if they had any input. When the commander got to me, first of all, it was my first meeting. So he said, "Who are you?" I introduced myself. And he said, "Well, do you have anything to add?" And I said, "Oh, by the way, I do." And so I gave him a suggestion. And he kept going around the room and got back to the table. And all of a sudden, he stopped in his tracks. He wheeled his chair back around and looked at me, because I'm scared to death. I got a 2-star general looking at me as a second lieutenant. And he said, "Well, you repeat what you just said." And I said it over again. And he said, "Oh my God, why didn't we think of that?" Now, to be clear, what I said was not rocket science.
Right.
It was different. I came at the problem from a different perspective.
Right.
I had a different experience than everyone else in the room. And that's the value of diversity. You throw a problem on the table and you have folks attack it from different angles. And that only makes the decision better, the company better, and the board stronger.
Thank you, General. You know, Ralph, you were at AT&T, one of the big American corporate institutions, and you've had not only intellectual insights as it relates to diversity, but you also have some personal experience yourself.
Yes, DeForest. I was lucky to get experience internationally early in my career, and it really brought home the importance of diversity. I remember looking at our international wireless properties early on when text messaging was just getting started, and we had one country that was not performing as well as the other ones. When I went and looked, I realized that the entire leadership was made of mature males, and we were not performing well in the youth segment. So the CEO and I was the chair of the board, agreed to restructure the country and put in a segment that we call the youth segment, also called the cool segment. People that would be 25 years or younger. And we put a 22-year-old young lady in charge of the segment. That was very radical in those days. She came back to us with changing the distribution, changing the colors. She hired an all-girls band to promote the product. She came to the board, presented the proposal to me, and I had to be frank with her. I think this is too radical. I don't like it. And she said, "Sir, you are not the target audience." And you know what? I listened to that young lady. We funded fully her proposal. After we did that, the sales went up incredibly high. The text messaging per capita went off the charts. The country became the second country in the world in sending text messages per capita, only second to the Philippines. And it all happened because I listened to this young lady, even though my own bias was to be more conservative about it. And it really brought home to me the importance, the logic that says, if you're going to serve a segment or a community, you need to have people from that segment or the community in your company, from the board level to the lowest levels possible. I brought that message back to the US when I was the CEO of AT&T Mobility. We did exactly that in the African American, the Hispanic, and the Asian market. And we won the #1 market share in each of those markets in wireless postpaid over a period of 10 years, when we grew revenues by 50 billion, grew EBITDA by 23 billion, and that diverse team won the J.D. Power Award 9 times in a row. So diversity works. It worked for me, and I am a strong believer that diverse teams, all the way from the board to the lowest levels, is the best approach to tackle the market.
You know, I'm sure all of us, having lived through the most rapidly changing technology age in history, have at least one story where our technology has been the subject of tutoring by a younger person. Ever since our video recording machines, we've always benefited from having some young people around to show us how to do something with this new technology. Mm-hmm. You know, Irene Chang Britt, when we spoke last week, you had mentioned the nominations governance committee on corporate boards. I find that many people seeking to be corporate directors don't fully appreciate the role of the nominations and governance process in accessing opportunities for directorships. And conversely, many boards don't put their nom-gov process to the best possible use. Could you talk about how you think the nominations governance process can enhance the diversification of corporate governance?
It's such a great question, DeForest, and just as the general and Ralph have talked about the the importance of diversity and what it brings to companies and company strategy and decision making, I think we have to be intentional as board members about going after the right mix. And I come from consumer goods, and we've always known that having decision makers who reflect the population makes so much more sense, because we can empathize, and having that discussion around the table is really important. So as a NomGov chair, as many of my colleagues can attest to as well, you have to have a strategy to go after this. You not only lay out the strategy of the company and the skills matrix of the current directors, but you have to also lay out where people come from, gender-wise, sexual identification-wise, race-wise, and frankly, socioeconomic background-wise as well, so that we can bring empathy to those discussions. And so to go after it with a couple of different viewpoints as a NomGov chair when you are having your committee search for the next person is really, really critical, because you want that ultimate mix of voices. But I will say as well, in terms of, and I'm very proud on boards like Bright House Financial, for instance, we are 50-50 diverse, and we are thrilled with stuff like that. We were having a conversation one time about diversity also within the management ranks, and the notion of allies makes so much sense as well in the discussion, because when we were having problems in the financial industry, it's not always easy to get diversity. And one of the white male directors said, sort of put his fist nicely on the table, and he says, "I will not stand for non-movement in diversity." And that was almost a shot that rang through the world. So it's about strategy, it's about getting the right pattern going, and then also about having allies on the other side supporting it. I think that is, for me, the full package.
Well, Ken, we just heard the importance of strategy. And I mean, let's be honest. There are very few places left in the world, much less in corporate America, where old white men are having strategy meetings to figure out how to keep the women out, how to keep the blacks out, how to keep the LGBTQ out. I mean, everybody has a statement for equal opportunity. And if asked, everyone has this noble goal of diversifying from top to bottom. So let's get down to the brass tacks. If everybody believes it, then what's missing in terms of tactical realities to increase the pace of diversifying corporate boards?
Thanks for the question. In my view, the key part of any strategy, you have to connect it to intentionality. Do you intend to execute? And how important is execution to you, and is it in every fiber of your being? Statements are wonderful, all of the stuff around, we're funding this group, or we're helping early childhood education, or we're giving money over here, but that tends to be like, we're going to invest in a 50-year plan. We're not talking about 50-year Marshall plans. We're talking about how can you make an impact as soon as humanly possible to
Right.
go do the right thing, as the general said. So from my perspective, that is about having not just a clear statement, but also not getting caught in what I call the cul-de-sac of, we can't do reverse discrimination, or we can't do quotas. As a strategy, when you're talking about a strategy in the world of business, that typically means you set goals, you set a target. We're going to go take that hill over here. Here's and here's the time frame in which we're going to do it, and here's the way that we want to do it, and then we're going to build tactics to make sure that we can, we can go accomplish that goal. And in the world of business, we talk about targets, we talk about milestones, and then we go get those. And that's, so I'm not willing to get caught in any of these cul-de-sacs, because as a business, we know that when you have a diverse board, and diversity across a lot of categories, including age, by the way. In some of my boards, we're trying to go earlier. We're trying to get people in their, late 30s, 40s, because that, as described both in the general's example, as well as Ralph's example, that age diversity is critical. The Gen X's and the Gen Z's are some of the most influential people in all of our consumer markets. And if you don't have a view of them and how they feel and what's important to them around, around things that are, how do we save the world? I mean, this is a really important time. And I would say intentionality with specific targets that are captured and managed at the board level. And oh, by the way, very importantly, the top 2 levels of management. Because if the top 2 level of management, if people of color, women, they look at the top 2 levels of management and they don't see people or any kind of representation that looks remotely like them, why would they hang around? Why would they stay with your company? So it impacts a lot of things: succession, success in the marketplace, but intentionality, from my perspective, is the key thought. Are you intentional about accomplishing your strategies and your goals?
Yeah, and we measure outcomes in corporate America in business. We have metrics, and they factor into compensation, bonuses, and the like. And I think that's where the intentionality shows up. And when we're that intentional, that we are measuring success and including diversity goals in those measurements that have economic outcomes, then I think we'll take it much more seriously. For those who joined us late, you're listening to some of the finest corporate directors in this country, all of whom have experience in public companies where investors are the stakeholders, and the need to balance the stakeholders with the stockholders is always a challenge. And we're talking about diversity in corporate boardrooms. Lynn, I had an experience recently. One of my graduates, I have a course on how to become a corporate director, had a Rhodes Scholar, PhD from MIT, just a stellar example of what this entity said it was looking for. The problem was they didn't have any quote unquote openings at that time. Would you talk about the way companies can choose to behave if they'd like to really be inclusive, and not only public companies, but even as private equity firms invest in the marketplace, what strategies seem to be working?
Sure. So I'll start actually by just acknowledging that actually where General Spencer started this conversation, which is all of our boards have to simply embrace the fact that diversity does make a difference. It makes a difference. Now, I will tell you, I'm not sure all boards are there yet. Many are there. I've been a board member, in both public and private spaces now for over a dozen years, and I've never been the first woman or the first diverse person on any of those boards. So I've been blessed to be in spaces that largely kind of got it a while ago. But we're having this conversation because lots of boards just they believe they need specific expertise. They believe they need people who know something specific, and they just don't believe they can find it in a diverse candidate. You just got to start by making a choice. You got to believe that it makes a difference. And I will tell you, I know it does, and I've seen it make a difference. So I think that's a starting point. People just have to believe it makes a difference. And you have to then not be after a token solution. I would argue whether you are a public or private board, you can expand your board. And that's a strategy we've used in several of my boards, which is expand. Go add a board member. You don't have to wait for someone to retire or to terminate or to age off. You can expand almost every board out there. And that's a great way to go out. And what I have found in my boards that have done that, we go out and we fish in new ponds, as Irene was speaking to, and you find some great talent. Then it's a question of how many do you want to add, right? And I've been in many situations we've ended up adding 2 rather than the 1 we sought, because there is great talent that you got to embrace. And the last thing I just say is none of us want to be tokens, right? And none of us want to recruit token participants in our boardrooms. And I think realizing that folks are coming at this. This is what board work is, real work, and they're coming at this with a desire to make an impact. And so, and yet in so doing, you've got to embrace a different way of thinking. Diverse board members will ask, again, General Spencer, mentioned it. They may come at problems from a different perspective and may ask questions that seem a little unfamiliar. Embrace that, right? That's the reason you've got them in the room, and help coach them on how to find their voice and be an effective voice.
Wow. all of you are just so profoundly interesting and so inspiring. You make it sound not only compelling, but you make it sound so possible. And I think that's a part of our objective today. We want corporate leaders to know this is possible, that it's preferable, as the general and others have said, it's possible, and there are people out there. Terry, when I first looked at your resume, I saw an example of a great corporate executive. But then when I kept reading, I saw even a broader example of a great corporate director. How do you make that transition, taking executive experience and translating it into value on the governance level? Because as directors, we don't run companies. We are the governing board of the company. But on the other hand, there are people who have great executive experience who would be great directors if people could help make that translation. How did you do it?
Yeah, no, Forrest, I think that's a great point. And I think to Lynn's point, does require companies to think differently about the skill sets and talents that individuals bring to the table and the breadth of their experience. I mean, certainly I served in some degree as an operator in my business. I served as general counsel. I served as the chief human resource officer. And typically those are not roles that boards would look for. And I think that's been the excuse lately. If you're not the CEO, if you're not the CFO, if you're not head of a large operating unit, then that's a reason that you're not considered for the opportunity. And I've been in a number of situations where I've seen boards with a slate of candidates, whether the white males are the senior executives, the CEOs, the CFOs, and then the diverse candidates are individuals like me that may come from general counsel or CHRO or a marketing role. And inevitably, there's a disparate value placed on those experiences relative to the CEO. But the reality of it is that there are individuals now serving in large organizations, serving in very diverse roles, very innovative new companies that bring a broader breadth of experience and perspective than in the past. And it is important for those individuals to be able to translate that into language that is consistent with how boards are expected to operate. Focusing on strategy, focusing on transformative thought processes. How can you help companies look differently about their business in a new environment? Looking at technologies differently, looking at market shifts, from retail to consumer, retail to digital. And sometimes individuals just aren't communicating and articulating their experience in a way that demonstrates that they've been involved in those sorts of decisions and those sorts of discussions in the corporate C-suites. So, it is on both parts. It's on the parts of the individual to make sure that they can articulate the scope and scale of their experience. I operated in 200 countries around the world, and we had over 500,000 employees. And so that's a scope and scale that can add value to a business. So it's on the individual's responsibility to be able to articulate that experience, but it's also on the company's responsibility to look differently at the skill sets that can add value and that can provide different and unique perspective and can sit in the board in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. Of course, Sarbanes-Oxley imposes on public companies certain specific requirements. The Securities and Exchange Commission has certain criteria to qualify as a financial expert. So we do need certain expertise that comes both with training and experience in the area of audit, in areas like risk and compliance. But to all of your points, the fact is the world is not limited. The world of corporate governance is not limited to such specialized areas that it cannot be open to people with new ideas and different perspectives. I want to congratulate all of you. We're not even halfway through, and all of you have had a chance to give your opening statements. You should give yourself a round of applause. So listen, here's going to be the harder part, because I want to be a little more freewheeling if we can. I want to ask you this question, and it's open to whoever would like to answer it in whatever order you're able to grab the mic first. We are experiencing now in this particular season mandates for diversity on corporate boards. The investment community has put corporations on notice for women directors and now even for ethnic minority directors. The state of California has said every public corporation based in California must have women on their board. The investment community, NASDAQ, all of these institutions are making now regulatory and investment mandates. And I'm just wondering how you feel about being a part of a group that's being required, and whether or not that requirement makes you feel a bit uncomfortable because you might be perceived as being less than qualified, but you're a necessary requirement because the big folks are looking over their shoulders. How do you feel about that?
You know, I'd be happy to jump in if I could on this particular thing, because I mentioned this concept of you know, words matter, and there has been a tendency in boardrooms to get wrapped around the axle on things like, oh my goodness, we can't do reverse discrimination, or we can't do quotas. And the reason, so I was pointing out that that's a trap, and it's a historical trap. Mandates, as you described, DeForest, Dr. Forrest, you know, I think it's more about boards taking control of their destiny and the country's destiny and the world's destiny, and saying, you know we have to move forward. Therefore, again, we're going to have a strategy for changing, you know, the makeup of our boards. Now, that's a decision that boards should take on. The mandates, actually, you know, they've done great work in Europe going down this path. I think we're going to do good work in this country as well. I don't focus on the mandates as much as we say, what is it that the board needs to do? Yes, you have to pay attention to regulatory constraints and laws, but at the end of the day, it's about the board taking control of their destiny and deciding what they want to be. And once the company sets a strategy to go accomplish that, those mandates become less important. And if you're intentional about going after accomplishing your strategy, you don't spend time worrying about the challenges of words, which has typically been the thing that has held us back. So, full stop.
Great, Ken. Thanks, Ken. I tend to agree.
You know, if I could jump in for just a second on that, and it's sort of the dirty word in the US especially, that quotas, right? Nobody loves quotas. But on the other hand, we're all business people, and what gets measured gets done. And so the fact that folks are coming in, whether it's regulatory or frankly from some of our largest shareholders and stakeholders, and it actually feels great coming from our shareholders and stakeholders because they're the ones who are judging us as a corporation and as a board. I think that whole idea of metrics and measurement to get a tide moving is actually the right thing. And it's not out of generosity of spirit. It goes way back to what the General and Ralph were saying about why it makes a difference to corporate performance to have more diversity. If you truly believe in that, then you actually listen to those mandates, not so much as a burden, but as something that is that might be helpful to the corporation's success. And I think we can help as board members in paving the way, especially I'll just go back to NomGov for a second. On a couple of board searches recently, I had been looking for a CIO and a CFO. And in the financial industry, we kind of got back, same old, and people all look the same and all that. And we just said, no, go back. There are CIO females and there are CFO females and people of color. And it might have taken a couple rounds to get past the usual suspects, but we did. And it was great, and they're fabulous board members. And I give that slight example for that whole idea is, if you believe, if you've got the mandates and if you believe, then you will go and find the way.
Yeah, you know, Irene, I've been in 2 CEO searches, and of course, to facilitate the management of the process, we necessarily use the firm, but the reality is, to get past that small circle, that the firms all know, it was up to us as directors to bring in candidates, to find people, to use our networks and our relationships. And of course, the firm plays a role. But I think if we rely completely on the firm, then we have just what I think Ken called the cul-de-sac. And I think Ralph even talked about the fact that same firm, same people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
DeForest, that's one
DeForest.
aspect that I wanted to reinforce is that sometimes when you get a mandate like this, the first response is we don't have enough qualified candidates. And that's just not true. That's just not true based on my experience. They're out there. The problem is when we keep using the same firms, and like Lynn said, they keep fishing in the same ponds. We need to find other sources, because clearly the future of the corporate board is not just getting people that have a certain title, but that have a certain skill. Take, for example, cybersecurity. Most CEOs are not going to be great cybersecurity experts. You need a CIO who has done it. If you need a financial expert, most likely that'll be a CFO. And so I think when you look at the skills needed to complement the board, there's plenty of fish out there that are qualified to serve on the board. And if you don't like the fish you're getting from the search firm you have, fire them or get another firm to complement them that may give you the diversity in search that you need.
Lynn, you tried to get in. Come on in now.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to add, you asked the question about how do we feel about the mandates point. And here's what I would honestly say I felt. This summer, in particular, after George Floyd's murder, I stepped back and said, look, what's my responsibility? And I thought very seriously about my work in rooms of power, boardrooms in the United States of America. And the fact is that as a board member, forget as a female or anything else, as a board member, I've failed. I mean, for years we have had numbers, targeting for our boards, for our management teams, more diversity. And the fact is we haven't hit those numbers. And so I think to Irene's point a minute ago about measure, so how do I feel about the notion of mandates? Look, I think if Me Too hadn't happened, I don't think we would have made as much progress in getting women in the boardrooms. If we hadn't had some reckoning this summer around social justice, I'm not sure I and others might not have awoken to the need to really get serious at a different level about diversifying our boardrooms. Not because it's the moral right thing to do. It's also the right thing to run our companies better. And I just had to look at that, and that's how I feel. I don't come at this I just come at it feeling like I have more to do as a board member to make more progress here.
So Terry,
I can jump in for a second as well.
General, and then Terry, I want to talk to you about being double gold, being a Black woman. All right.
Okay. Well, you asked a really good question, and that is, do the mandates make women or minorities feel as though, they were put on the board just to, just to fill a square, and that once you get on the board, you just kind of sit there and everybody feels good about themselves. As a board member, I don't look at it that way. One, I look at it as though, I deserve to be here, and I'm here for a reason, to make the company better. And so I don't view it that way. The other, though, quite frankly, is I view it as a responsibility to show the board why they have me or others on the board. It always harkened back to Jackie Robinson, who was the first African-American to play in the national leagues. He was brought in at the behest of the entire league and took a lot more abuse than any of us will ever have to face, hopefully. But something strange happened. The guy could play. The guy was good. They started winning. They started winning championships, and then other teams decided, wait a minute, I'm not going, I can't hold on to these old ideas I had. If I want to win, it's about talent. It's about how can I make my team better? That's what it's about. And so, you asked a really good question, and it is something I think we all think about. But I view it both as, I want to try to make this company stronger. I want to try to make this board stronger. And by God, when I get there, you're going to understand why you hired me, because I'm going to show you my value.
Great, General. Terry, before you answer, just a slightly different twist in small circles behind closed doors, knowing that there is the aftermath of Me Too that put an emphasis on women, and knowing that in the aftermath of George Floyd, there's an emphasis on blacks. There are people who describe persons like yourself as double gold. And for those companies that are checking boxes, they can check at least 2 boxes for a black woman. How do we protect black women from being perceived as only having had the opportunity because of those boxes?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And I certainly have been in a situation where I'm the only African-American, the only woman on the board. And it does make you feel uncomfortable. But to Larry's point, I think it really is about, you know, if you're the icebreaker, you have to demonstrate your worth and value at the table. I was interviewed by the chair of a board one time as I was being recruited for a position. And halfway through the interview, he stopped and said, you know, I thought this was just a diversity interview, but you really do have some experience that could be valuable for this business. So I do think it is about, you know, breaking the ice and just demonstrating to people that there are, you know, that there can be contributions made by people from different backgrounds than boards traditionally see. But I'll tell you, my concern is, you know, board members, that if you go on a board in that context, but if the board doesn't eventually evolve, I mean, you have to be viewed as having value and at the table. It can be extremely uncomfortable if you're at a table and you don't feel that your voice is being heard, that you're being patronized, or that you're really only there as a token, as Lynn pointed out. And so I think it's incumbent upon board members to realize they can vote with their feet in that instance and not get so swayed with the position that you don't have the courage to leave and to, you know, make a point that if you're not going to be taken seriously at the table, then that's not an organization that, you know, you want to be a part of. And so I think eventually, if enough people leave those organizations and gravitate towards those that are serious about having diverse voices at the table, then those companies will get the message as well.
I want to start with you now, Terry, because I don't want you to get caught on the back end as we approach the landing deck here. But when I was on my first board, first of all, the people that I went to for help in preparing for my board were unwilling to help me. And so I had no real mentor to help shape me in ways that this conversation may be shaping some prospective board members. And then when I was on the board, I was the only me. Not only was I the only black, I was the only Baptist on the board, and that might have been more unique to being black. And I found the need to embrace one or two other directors and almost adopt them to help me understand board culture, board protocol, because I had never been on a corporate board before of a for-profit company. I'd just like each of you to describe what your experience was like as you acclimated your mind and your behavior and your goals as new directors. Terry?
Yeah, my first board, I was not prepared at all, quite frankly, to be able to deal with that. And I tried to do it on my own. A couple of meetings in, I had an older gentleman, probably the oldest gentleman on the board, sitting next to me. And he finally leaned over and said to me, he said, you know, I think you have some really good things to say. He said, but you have a tendency of putting your hand over your mouth. It was a, you know, subconscious reflex that I didn't realize. And it was preventing me from being able to articulate myself in a very clear and concise way. And he was generous enough just to lean over and say, I think you got some really good things to say. Quite frankly, he was hearing impaired and he couldn't hear me. So it really, but it pointed out to me, you know, just how conscientious I had to be about how my demeanor, my positioning in the boardroom, where I sat in the boardroom, who I sat next to, what relationships I developed, and more importantly, not just in the boardroom, but taking those, you know, that invested intentional investment in time to invest in those relationships outside of the boardroom as well. And so going into this, you know, my second, third, and fourth board, I was much more specific about creating those alliances, understanding who were those people that we could call in between the meetings, and I could get the real background story, that I could, you know, share my perspective and say, as we're going into this meeting, you know, can you reinforce this position? or can we be aligned in this? And that's just absolutely something you have to learn and be engaged in, because it's not something you can just come in, sit in the meeting and be expected to have an impact on that one day without having engaged outside of that board meeting.
That is so huge. Lynn, what was your experience?
Yeah, I throw in, first of all, I say the same, Terry, I concur. My first board, I had a lot to learn the first year or so. And look, I think it's good for all of us who are listening on this to remember, any new board member coming in wants to be successful. And so trying to figure out this, when to speak up and say the right thing at the right time and when to hold back. And look, there's a whole dynamic that we all know around pick your points in a board meeting, right? And I think one of the things I really had to learn is that, frankly, as a woman growing up in the beer business, I knew full well there's a whole lot of social lubrication and sort of, relationships being built outside of the meeting room, but I wasn't always invited to those, right? And I learned how to be successful and do my work as an executive around that. But it took me a while in the board setting to figure out when to speak up in the room and when to reach out offline to my fellow board members, to the management team, to the CEO, and to build those relationships. I had to learn that. And I just think it's good for all of us to remember and to learn and to coach new board members on.
Yeah, and the reason this is related to diversity is because inside the boardroom, if the boardroom culture is not receptive and nurturing, then you have a culture that really undermines the goal, because the goal is not only recruitment but retention of diverse directors. Now, General, you came to the board with all of that military bravado, but somebody had to help you in the first couple of innings.
Well, I'm not sure I came to the board with bravado, but but this is a fascinating topic. This sense of this notion of assimilation, and how do you make that work? Again, a quick personal example. Back again as a second lieutenant, my wife and I go into our first social function in our unit, and I'll be quite honest with you, and probably more transparent than I should be. It was almost like walking into a group of folks who were unlike me, because we were the only African American couple in the room, and 5 people came up to me and asked me what my handicap was. And I grew up in Southeast DC. There are no golf courses there. I had no idea what they were talking about. Now,
Right.
I know what my handicap is now. I'm just embarrassed to tell you what it is. And again, growing up where I grew up, I have nothing against country music, but I didn't have an appreciation for the genre. So everyone, when the band cranked up and they were all singing to the songs, my wife and I were just lost. And so similarly, when I went on my first board, as someone has mentioned, it happened to be I was the only African American on the board. There were 2 women on the board, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because we had that same assimilation challenge in common. But both women embraced me, and they helped me come along on the board, helped me embrace me. But I think for those that are watching, this is real. I mean, you're going to go into a board generally where most of the folks don't look like you, and working your way through gaining their confidence, being able to interact with them socially is a really big challenge.
Big challenge. I found the same, General. The board that I've been on the longest is a board of predominantly white males, and the board member with whom I've become the closest is a woman who had some of the same assimilation challenges I had. Now, Ken, you came to corporate directorship having had a significantly successful corporate and entrepreneurial career. How did you find making the transition into the boardroom?
Well, it was really a learning experience for me. And one of my big learnings was that at the end of the day, board work is about building effective teams. And effective teams means, kind of figuring out where you fit in and what your role is, and how can you help the team both be most effective, And I have to be honest, I was fortunate to have a successful corporate career, and then move into venture and eventually, do a startup and take it public. And so by the time I got, I was chairman of my board, and then I joined another board And the big learning for me was I needed to be a lot more self-aware. And I think both Lynn and Terry have spoken about this. You know, when you're the CEO and you're the leader and you're tip of the spear, you tend to, you can, or at least I did. I tended to talk too much. Okay, I tended to be I used to be the one driving the conversation, and I really had to pull myself back and figure out that I didn't have to be at the front of every conversation. I didn't have to contribute to every single topic. There were times when, you know, I just needed to let, you know, it's fine to have other people be at the front of the room, other people driving. So for me, it was a learning journey around picking your spots, you know, prioritizing where you can contribute, particularly in the room, and then doing work outside of the boardroom and making sure you're not sucking all the oxygen out of the room. And so I really had to pull myself back in, be really introspective about, you know, and what I found was, it's an interesting thing. The less you talk, the more people want to hear what you have to say.
I've discovered that myself.
Well said.
Irene, what was your transition into the boardroom like?
Yeah, I mean, much like others have said, Terry and Lynn, it's tough the first time, and you're a working executive, and then you go into this room where you think, oh my gosh, everybody's going to be so much smarter than me, right? And from a different industry as well. But I learned early on that, you know, I had been dealing with boards for quite a while in the C-suite, right? But from the other side, and I actually was one of the executives assigned specifically to compensation because I was running strategy. And it wasn't until I realized that actually I know this decently well, I just have to shift my perspective. So the reason why I say that is I've now taken that as a role in my boards, whether I'm NomGov chair or not, is I try to reach out to the new board directors. And as Ken, Lynn, and Terry have all pointed out, it is so important to get the next generation in, which usually means working executives, right? To get beyond the same old folks as candidates. And so if they're intimidated, I'm always at their door saying, hi, so how would you deal with your board? I had one example of a woman that I recruited onto board, working executive, brilliant person, a little bit more quiet at the beginning. And I said, you know, you're dealing with the board of your company, which is much larger than our company. And as soon as we started talking about that and she started realizing that, it just flipped a switch. She's a brilliant board director. And somebody needed to give her that tip, and that tip into confidence of getting there. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I have from my ramp up.
Yeah, that's marvelous. These stories are just priceless. And I'm hoping anyone who is a current director will have a broader sensitivity to the kind of dynamics that are often unspoken, but anyone striving to become a corporate director or even to be one again would understand that it's not just you. All of us have felt these levels of stress, discomfort, and tension, and it's just a natural part of the process. Now, I'm going to be very unfair because we only have 12 minutes left, actually 11, and this question deserves much more time, but I'd like each of you to at least give a minute or two in response. I have been determined since board number one not to be, quote unquote, the black director. And there is this horizontal relationship that I have, of course, with my director peers, but then there's the vertical relationship with the employees, with the customers who see me as the black director. And I'm not in management, but when black employees complain about racism inside the company, when black customers complain about mistreatment, I have this unusual burden because I am black and I am a director, and I can't just say to the person who has agreed, oh, that's not my role. How do you balance your role on the governance level with your need to perhaps consider advocating for women, for Latinos, for LGBT, for Black Americans? How have you thought through the way you manage those dynamics? Anybody?
Let me just give you my thoughts on that. And these are thoughts that are reflective of yet not just my role on the board, DeForest, but my role as an executive. And like all of us here, when I was going up the ranks, people tended to view me as a Hispanic executive. Wanted me to send me to Latin America and to other places where I could fit in better.
Yeah.
I refused. And
Yeah.
I said, I don't want to be seen as a great Hispanic director. I want to be seen as a great director who happens to be Hispanic. So please don't give me an adjective in front of my name. But what I think is helpful as directors and as leaders is for us to get up in front of our people, whether they're employees or customers, and explain to them our own story and the story that made us successful. And as a role model, it helps others to follow your path. And I've always admitted my authenticity. They know exactly where I'm from, how I got to this country. But I want you to treat me not just as a Hispanic director, but as a great director who happens to be Hispanic.
Great. Who's next?
Yeah, DeForest, you hit on a pretty interesting topic here because, and in my case, I've gotten both of those, sort of a double hit. As not only African American, but as a veteran, I have African Americans that have come to me as a board member and veterans as well. And again, the elephant in the room is, as people, we tend to be more comfortable around those that we have things in common with. And so that's only natural. That's going to happen. I think though, what you have to be careful with though as a director is, I can't ever usurp the authority of a CEO.
Right.
And so as I try to navigate my way through that, when folks come directly to me, I'm very careful to rein in the CEO and say, look, how do you want me to handle this? Because I don't want to get in between you and your employees. That's not a board member's job. Boards stay strategic. They don't get into managing the company, certainly don't get into managing personnel issues. That said, I think to be that, the thing that's interesting is that I ask folks when that happens to me, I ask the CEO and others, why do you think they came to me and they weren't comfortable coming to you with this problem?
Right.
And I think that causes the board and the CEO to be more introspective about, hey, I've got to be more open. I've got to be more, got to be more approachable.
Yeah, it does become a teaching moment at times. Great.
Yeah,
Who's next?
DeForest, like Ralph, I never wanted to be viewed as the woman director or the Black director. But, when George Floyd's situation happened and all of the companies were making statements and everything, I kept waiting, for my company to make a statement in any of the companies I worked with. And I wasn't hearing it. Now, I was anxious and I wanted to hear something right away. And so I said, well, I'm a director. And to Lynn's point, I finally just said, well, what should I do? So I sent an email to the CEO, the chair of the board, the general counsel, and others, and said, look, I see what other companies are doing. I need to know what our company is going to do because people are looking to me to answer the question, what is your company's position on these issues?
Right.
And so it ignited conversations, some of which I think would have happened had I not sent the email, some of which I don't think would have happened had I not sent the email. So although none of us wants to be viewed as there because of our race, sex, or our status, I think we all know that at some point in time, you have to use that and maybe call attention issues that are relevant for groups that you represent, even when that's not why you want to be there. But you feel obligated to speak up on behalf. Now, my voice would be, as long as that's not the only reason they're looking to me, and that's not the only time that they, turn my way or ask for input is when it deals with the race issue, I'm happy to speak on that regard. But you also want to be viewed as having value beyond that.
Exactly.
Yeah, Terry, it's really interesting that you should say that because after the George Floyd murder, I felt racked with a need to do something, but I almost felt guilty as an Asian woman to bring that up. I was thinking, oh my gosh, are they going to think, oh gosh, it's just somebody who's taking the minority stance, right? And I'm on 5 boards, and I called every chairman, every CEO, and said, okay, we're going to open up a conversation with this. I just have to talk about this to a person. They all said, Oh, thank goodness you brought it up, because we
Right,
didn't know how to bring it up. Many of them
right.
were white. We didn't know how to bring it up. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I had not done that, I don't know what I would have done with myself. The interesting thing is one of my CEOs actually took it all the way to getting down into his organization, right to the frontline workers. It's a healthcare company, and he's a wonderful, but fairly privileged white male. And he said, honestly, I didn't realize what my frontline workers were going through to a deep level. I knew it intellectually. He's gone on listening tours. He's done it, but it's been a sea change. And I thought, gosh, if I hadn't made that first call, right? So good on you for doing that, because I think we all have to take on that responsibility.
I agree.
DeForest, I will mostly just echo what those folks before me said. I'm guessing everybody on this panel has struggled our entire careers with saying no. None of us do it very well, right? We are all pretty busy people at home, at work, and we get full lives. But this challenge of navigating the really tough waters and the twists and turns on when do you engage, when is enough, when is not enough, when is too much, it's just part of the work. And as I said earlier, being a board member, it's work, it's real work. And figuring out how to find your voice that can be heard, that can be impactful, that isn't overbearing, that isn't meddling, that is strategic, that is caring, it's part of the work. And I'm proud to serve alongside other board members who we're trying to figure it out.
Well, all of your remarks really speak to the fact that it is work. I know in my young years, before going on any board, I thought to myself, my God, these people get paid that much money to go to 4 meetings? And the image from the outside is that the compensation is simply to go to meetings. And if no other myth has been dispelled today, then thank you for dispelling that myth. It's complicated, it's important work, it's vertical and horizontal, it's got to be intentional. There are multiple levels of dynamics involved. And I can see why Board Prospects chose you to be on this panel, because you are exemplary in the way you handle your directorships and the way people should understand corporate governance. I must say that Board Prospects, and I wasn't asked to say this, but Board Prospects was a tremendous resource to me personally, as one of my boards was trying to scratch our heads and figure out how can we get more applicants for a vacant position. And because of Board Prospects, we must have increased the interest tenfold, and we went far beyond where the search firms would have taken us. And I have to commend Mark and his team for the excellent platform they've assembled, and for the interactivity that exists on the platform, and for the kinds of people that you are that are attracted to the platform. We have 1 minute left, and I just want to take that minute to thank all of you. None of us need another Zoom meeting. None of us need another panel. None of us needed to invade our busy year-end activities with this kind of event, but it speaks to where your hearts are and the fact that you deem this conversation to be significant. And I'm just hopeful that those who watch it live and those who may watch the recording will understand the breadth and depth of who you are as individuals, and what this issue is for this country. We have been a divided country in recent years in ways that make diversity perhaps a very difficult conversation. And I'm hopeful that this event will contribute to the healing of the country, and more importantly, the elevation of our ability to take advantage of all of the freedoms that we enjoy and the economic opportunities that are created by the free enterprise system, to have a great corporate community led by great corporate directors like yourselves. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mark, for having us. And I will now turn this final minute back over to our host, Mark Rogers, in Board Prospects.
Thanks, DeForest. as we come to the close of today, I want to thank you and all of our panelists for what has been an extremely informative and really entertaining hour on this very important topic. It was just an honor having all of you share your perspectives. I also want to take this opportunity to once again thank Aon and KPMG, Costco, and Bright House Financial for supporting the webinar. I would encourage each of you to visit boardprospects.com and allow us to show you how we can help you and your corporation create a much more diverse and talented board recruitment pipeline. And with that, I would like to close by wishing all of you a happy and safe holiday season and to thank you for watching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well all. Be safe.